Hello, and welcome to the definitive list of games released in 2020 that I played in 2020. Thanks for watching this video, and my apologies for any very low production values. I'm not really a video production guy, but I thought rather than putting this list just on paper or on a screen, I thought I'd make a little presentation thing. So, without further ado, the list. But before we get into the list, just want to do some quick honourable mentions. I played a lot of games in 2020. Something happened in 2020, which we all know and we all talked about so much during 2020, so I won't even talk about why, but you pretty much know why. So there's a big list to go through. But some honourable mentions are Persona 5 Royal. I did not finish this game. I'm actually playing it now. I only started it right at the end of the year because I played the original Persona 5 and just never got around to doing Royal when it came out. Deadly Premonition 2. That's not the best game in terms of performance, but it's such a bizarre story, bizarre world. So I'm going to give it an honourable mention of just like, hey, that game actually came out in 2020. And finally, Astro's Playroom. That was a great just introduction to the PlayStation 5. A very short game and a great demonstration of DualSense. But yeah, fun game. So let us now get on with the list. Number 10, Paper Mario, The Origami King. I've loved the Paper Mario series since the original N64 game, although I never actually played the N64 game until the Wii Virtual Console days, because I only rented it on N64 back in the day. So the first proper one I played was Thousand Year Door, which people love, of course. This is not like that at all. Paper Mario is no longer an RPG, unfortunately. But what this game is, if you sort of remove yourself from worrying about things that may not ever change, this is still a very funny, very, very funny, and fun event, just a fun adventure as well. But it is absolutely hilarious. I probably was laughing out loud quite a lot with this game. And there's some really nice moments with characters, definitely. Bobby is one that comes to mind for a lot of people. So that gets a number 10 spot for me. Number 9 is Spider-Man Miles Morales. Played this on the PlayStation 5, and it is a extraordinary action adventure game. It really showcases what the PlayStation 5 can do in terms of load times, just fast travel being very smooth. There was a few bugs when I played it. I think pre-patches. The PS5 was a bit buggy at first. It seems to have settled now, which is great. So I had a couple of times where this game actually crashed on me, which was really took me out of the game a little bit. So it's a bit lower on the list as a result. But despite those small things, which probably aren't issues anymore, it's a fantastic game, and it's a bit short. It's definitely not Spider-Man 2. It's more like Spider-Man 1.5, but there isn't filler either. It sort of just goes right into it. And Miles is a great character. I knew a little bit about Miles, but not a lot compared to Peter Parker. So this was a cool introduction to Miles as well in terms of knowing more about him as a character and what his motivations are. A really solid Spider-Man story and game. Number 8, Animal Crossing New Horizons. So I played about 80 hours of this game, so by no means as much as many other people. Played it probably for a good month, 2 months. Sort of really got into the Easter because that was sort of right when it came out. In terms of the events, saw a season change, and then I kind of sort of got out of it, but I got a lot of value out of it at the time, and it was I hadn't played an Animal Crossing game since the GameCube days, in fact, so a lot of the new features that have been coming in this series since were completely new to me. and being able to visit friends' islands was really nice, particularly when it was just when a lot of people were being locked down and we couldn't do that in real life. So, but even without the lockdown situation, it's still a fun, exciting game, and clearly that helped push this game in some way. But it's great to see it so popular now. Yeah, definitely. I did drop off. I sort of got to the point where I wasn't interested in doing the chores anymore, essentially. But got to the point where you could terraform and definitely terraform my island and upgraded the house a few times. So got good value out of it, and it's a cool game to pop into every now and then. I did pop back for Christmas time and stuff like that. So great game. Number 7, Cyberpunk 2077. This game, this has been, I guess, this is a definition of overhyped. It's actually quite a good game. So I played this on the Xbox Series X. So as a result, did not experience the performance issues that unfortunately are happening on the base consoles, and that is definitely an issue and a fundamental issue that hopefully will be fixed, and I'm sure it will eventually. Um, we're going to get free next gen upgrades as well, and there's all the CD Projekt Red does have a lot to kind of a lot of goodwill to get back, but beyond all of the noise, if you sort of move yourself from the noise, and I was fortunate enough to be able to do that with just enjoying the game, it is a good game here. But even without those bugs and all that noise, it's not a number one. It's not. I think The Witcher 3 is better in terms of CD Projekt Red's offerings, but I still really liked Cyberpunk. The world building is really good. What it is showing you in terms of this world and this extreme version of a future, that it's really a 1980s view of what the future looks like. Blade Runner and that kind of stuff. It's certainly, I'm not familiar with the source material, uh, the original game, the original Cyberpunk 2020, but I can imagine it would have been inspired in that way, and you can see that a lot. It reminds me of RoboCop as well in some ways, just the way certain things are presented. Um, and I love that sort of stuff, and it's a really interesting and fascinating world to explore. The best parts of this game are its main story and its side missions the character-based side missions. There's some really, really exciting moments in there. There's some really good character moments that CD Projekt Red have been known for and do really well with. The kind of other parts of the game in terms of other missions that you do get a bit repetitive and samey. So some of those achievements that are 100% in all these districts, I'm nowhere near those. Played this game for about 60 hours to get to the finishing point. So did the main story, did a lot of the interesting side quests. And Keanu Reeves does a great job as well with Johnny Silverhand, and that whole way that plays out and the relationship between V and Johnny and how that plays out throughout the whole game is really cool. You'll miss out on a lot if you only do the main story as well, so it's definitely worth doing a lot of the side content where it's related to characters, because without that it's sort of a very short and not interesting game. You need to sort of engage in all of that other stuff to get the most out of it, I think. And it's kind of cool that they kind of give you the option to do that, I guess. So, if you're waiting for patches and things, please, absolutely do that. That makes sense to do that. In terms of crashes, I did get a few crashes and freezes and things like that on the Series X, but nothing game breaking. Most of it was more funny and silly. And a lot of the time, for most of the time, it was a really good run through on the Series X. So I think that, which was good for me. That certainly helped my experience. Number 6, Ghost of Tsushima. So this game kind of reminded me of Breath of the Wild a little bit in some ways, not in a lot of ways, but just the exploration aspect and how you sort of explored. This was sort of Sucker Punch's game being developed throughout the whole generation, really, and they kind of got it right at the end of the PS4's life. very enjoyable, very fun. Sort of towards the end, I kind of, again, with these open world games, samey in terms of some of the way the missions that you do and clearing camps and things like that. The story is good. It's not anything to be really super, nothing too surprising or extremely shocking or anything like that. But it's a good motivator. It keeps you going. The moment to moment gameplay is really good. The combat is quite fun. It's not a Sekiro or anything like that, but it's fun. And it's so pretty. It's a beautiful looking game. A showpiece in terms of graphical fidelity. Sony certainly did that with the PlayStation 4 towards in 2020 as we closed out and go on to PS5, which we will see in the next one. Which brings us to number 5, The Last of Us Part 2. So I really liked The Last of Us 1, really enjoyed The Last of Us 1, and equally enjoyed The Last of Us Part 2. No spoilers here, but there's a lot of discussion on the direction of the story and what people did like or didn't like about that, and I think a lot of that is overblown in terms of controversy. A story is a story. You don't have to like a story if you don't want to. That's totally legitimate. For me, I was there's no, this world is not gonna have a good story or sorry, a good ending or a happy ending. It's just not this world. And even the first game, how it ends, it's debatable about what Joel's decision was, and that's the whole point. So they went in a certain direction with this one. To me, it's kind of the only thing that really motivates Ellie to do what she does in this game, and it gets pretty extreme in terms of the violence. It's there. It's certainly there for shock value, but it's also confronting. It's probably one of the only games that I can think of. Spec Ops: The Line is another one that comes to mind that had this sort of feeling as well. That it made you feel bad, killing multiple people. And there are so many games where you kill people, or defeat enemies, and kill things. And a lot of the time, it is nothing. You don't think about it. It's like any action movie or any other you know movie with lots of action in it, or medium with lots of action in it, where a lot of death takes place, but it doesn't really. Just part of the story. It's part of the fun. It's part of the journey. But this sort of really brings it home, particularly in just the way the facial animations are, the way the characters scream for help, the way they interact with each other, the story moments that happen, the twist in this game, and then how it kind of takes its whole second half, and how all of that plays out. Was surprising to me, and was I was lucky to kind of avoid the spoilers beforehand. I did kind of see a little spoiler about what happens, which was a bit frustrating in terms of a key motivator, I suppose. But then when I played the game, that sort of happened quite early. So the good thing for me was then, okay, let's continue. And by the end, I felt for both characters. I think I'm ultimately on Ellie's side because I've got the history with Ellie, but I could see where Abby was coming from and Abby's perspective, and her journey as well. And Sony have now even done a trailer of Abby's perspective, so it's not too spoilery to mention that at least. But yeah, this was a pretty heart wrenching and emotional game. Got the platinum in it as well. Yeah, definitely. It had me thinking about it for a while and talking to my friends about it when we finished it. It's one of those games that stuck with me. But there's others that are beyond that. So number 4 is Demon's Souls on the PlayStation 5. So I've got a bit of a history with this particular game. I actually purchased the Asian version. There was an Asian version on PlayStation 3 that had English as it had an English language option, and there was no word of it. I think getting any official English release, and I heard about it, and it seemed like an interesting game, so I bought it. Enjoyed what I played of it, but I never finished it. It got too difficult, and I just couldn't get through a certain point. And I can't remember exactly. I got through a few bosses. I think after the spider boss, and then I couldn't get further from memory originally. So this was my redemption arc. This was my moment to redeem myself for this game. I'd since played Bloodborne and Sekiro. I had played Dark Souls on PC. Never finished Dark Souls either, I know. So I've sort of got a bit of a interesting relationship with the Soulsy games. I finished Bloodborne, and I got to the final boss in Sekiro, but I never managed to defeat the final boss in Sekiro, which still, hesitation is defeat, and yeah. But anyway, this was my chance to kind of redeem myself with Demon's Souls, and was able to finish the game within 25 hours. So it wasn't too bad, actually. It was actually, you can kind of see that this is the first game in this type of game that From have been making. It is a graphical showpiece for the PlayStation 5 without question. It was, and it's just a really, the design of this game is really cool. I really like how you can go into different worlds, like the 5, 6 worlds that you go through in any kind of order that you want, and you go back to the sort of a home base. So if something gets a bit too difficult, you can kind of go to another area and kind of come back, and you're sort of encouraged to do that a little bit. I generally went in order, but you can mix it up, and that's cool. And what I found is, but towards the end, towards the sort of the last third of the game, it just got easier because you kind of go into an area that you could have gone into from the very start, but now you're really powerful. So a lot of the enemies are not as strong and things like that. So yeah, that I really like that game. Good stuff. Number 3 is Final Fantasy VII Remake. So back in the day, I was a Nintendo 64 kid. I never had a PlayStation 1, so I remember the debates between Final Fantasy VII and Zelda Ocarina of Time, of which is a bit weird because they're very different games. I eventually finally played Final Fantasy VII on the Nintendo Switch, funnily enough, and really liked it. It's dated now, but it was. I'm glad I did play the original. I sort of thought maybe I'll just leave it and play the remake only. I'm glad I did play the original now, knowing what the remake actually is. It is literally. It is not a remake of the game in the sense of the same story but just remade. It is remaking even the story itself, which everyone knows now. I won't go into too much as to why, but we all also knew that it was only going to be the Midgar section. Um, I'm not as connected to Final Fantasy VII in the same way because I only played the old one more recently. So the changes to me are like, yeah, sure, okay, that's cool. Do what you like. It's also exciting in a way because it makes the original non-redundant in a sense. Whereas, like Resident Evil remake, the original Resident Evil, you could argue is kind of redundant now. But this is like you could still play the original and not be worried that you're going to spoil remake. So you sort of you have the best of both worlds in a way. And it's interesting and exciting to see where this will go next, what's going to happen next. But it was, just a great journey the whole way. The characters are so well done. They've integrated a lot of the moments from a 1997 game into 2020 in a very effective way. I love it. What's going to be clear from the rest of these titles on the list is I'm really like JRPGs. And this was a great JRPG. But one that was a bit better, in my opinion, number 2, was Yakuza Like a Dragon. So I actually played this on the Xbox Series X, which is weird because I associate this series with PlayStation. But hey, it's great that it's on Xbox as well. And I got the Xbox One to get an Xbox Series X game, but it was the only next-gen version at the time, so it's kind of a weird situation there. I have played every game in the Yakuza series and love this series. Play from the original PS2 days. And I imported the Japanese version of Yakuza 3 and played that with a translator. on like printed on my lap, and sort of it was a very difficult way to play the game, but I did because it felt like Yakuza was never coming out in English officially ever again. And now it's so great to see that it is kind of a premier series now. This was a weird one because it was changing the game really to be a full blown JRPG, whereas the previous games were more action games, action adventure games with maybe some very light RPG elements. This is a full JRPG with the job system, with the party, the battle system being a turn based battle system. Um, Gear, crafting, all of these things, like all of the things you get in an RPG, this has, and it does it in such a effective way in that it is set in the real world essentially, and does JRPG-ness on everyday things. So, to change your job, you go to a job office, an employment office. You go to restaurants to eat, to recover your health and maybe get buffs for health or attack or something like that. And it's just done in such an effective way. Um, Yakuza has this kind of serious story, the serious main story, and then go crazy side content, and it can get really really crazy, really extreme, and because it's a JRPG and because of how they justify the turn-based nature of the game, and it's sort of justified in game in the story with the main character and how he loves Dragon Quest and how he has his imagination and stuff like that. It then is able to raise up the crazy to 11. Whereas all the other games had some crazy moments as well, but now this is unlike anything else. Like things that are more fantasy style, but still in a real world scenario that don't really make sense, but are funny and hilarious and awesome because of the way it's done. And the story is actually really good. Yet again, they keep just sort of outdoing themselves with the stories. It's probably one of the better ones overall, in a sense, I think. Some of them are sort of hazy in my mind because I played all of them essentially when they came out. Um, the party dynamics are cool as well because it makes, whilst Ichiban is the main character, all of the other characters that join in have sort of their own reasons for being there, good motivations for being there, and kind of lift it in a sense with the camaraderie between all of the group. Um, yeah, fantastic. And finally, the number one game is The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel 4. So, this is a very niche game, obviously. Most of the other games in this list are not so niche. But this is my number one, and my top three are all JRPGs. Now, this is my number one. I became familiar with this series only very recently. Trails of Cold Steel 3 came out last year. And in preparation for that, I purchased Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2 to prepare myself for Trails of Cold Steel 3. And in playing the first, within a few sessions, I just really fell in love with the characters, the world, the way everything was, the gameplay, and decided, okay, I'm gonna, get part two and we're gonna get ready for part three. So, but then I finished Trails of Cold Steel 3 early this year in 2020 and loved this, just fell into just loving this series so much. And 3 ends on such a cliffhanger that part 4 is kind of the culmination. I was aware that there are other games in the series, Trails in the Sky and Trails to Azure, Trails from Zero, the opposite way, which were never actually released officially in English. So the Trails in the Sky games, there's 3 games, and then there's another 2 games that are in that are all with different characters, a different party, if you like, in a different part of the continent, but with story beats that actually all lead up into what happens in part 3. And I certainly noted part 3 and then 4. Um, so I certainly noticed that when playing part 3, that there's a bigger world here. Sort of noticed that even in Cold Steel 1 and 2, but certainly in part 3. And 2020 being the year that it was, I ended up playing through Trails in the Sky games and the 2 Crossbell games that never actually got an English release. So thanks to fan translations, was able to play those 2 games. Played them all in 2020, sort of over between, kind of April to leading up to November, when Cold Steel 4 came out, and just sort of just slowly played through them all, um, uh, to prepare myself, and I am so glad I did. And by doing that, I think it just elevated this experience of Cold Steel 4 for me to something it otherwise would not have. This was the definition of the culmination. So we talk about it's been talked about Kingdom Hearts 3, for example, and that's a culmination. That was a culmination of all the other Kingdom Hearts games. And I played Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 and then 3, and didn't feel it as much, but I know there's other games to play that really get you that feeling as well. But I've got to say, I think Trails of Cold Steel 4 and the way Falcom have done their whole world building is much better than what is done in something like a Kingdom Hearts. I still enjoy Kingdom Hearts, but the this series does not get enough recognition in the broader gaming landscape, and I think more and more people need to play this series. It's obviously difficult to get into, I guess, because when people hear about, oh, there's all these other games you've got to play to enjoy it. I get that, I understand that, and I'd say you wouldn't want to play Cold Steel 4 without at least playing all of the other games in the Cold Steel saga. The good news is you can play all of the Cold Steel games just on a PlayStation, even on a PlayStation 4 or a 5. They will all play and work, but I cannot recommend this game enough, or this series enough. So for me personally, having being able to play all the other games in the series and get all that backstory, this was the complete definition of a culmination of everything coming to a close, and doing it in such an effective, exciting way. That gets me excited of what's to come. This is not over. So this is a culmination in terms of a very important, I suppose, story arc. But there are still things that are left open. There is still more to come. There are more games in the series that are coming in. For those that maybe don't understand why it's so significant, I guess the way to think about it is the game takes place in this continent, Zemeria. So it's a fictional continent that's kind of based on um, uh, the real world in a sense, but it's very anime inspired and so on. But each of these story arcs, so Trails in the Sky, and then the Crossbell games that they're known as, and then the Cold Steel games, they all take place in a different country within that continent, and star a new party, a new cast of characters. But then previous characters from other games join in on as well, or they make cameo appearances, or they might be guest party characters for moments. So when you have gone through all of these other games and gone through all of these journeys with these other characters, and then those characters come in who have now grown from those experiences and help you and are mentors for the new characters, it just has such an effective way of joining everything together, and makes for such an exciting um, and otherwise amazing experience. The final boss encounters in Cold Steel 4, with that culmination, it is the I've never seen a culmination done like that before. It's very Avengers Endgame in a sense, with all of the characters that show up, and because it's a game, you take active participation, and with all of those all-star cast of characters. Um, to top that off, the music is fantastic as well. The voice acting is reasonably good for an anime style inspired game with a lower budget. And it was just such an experience that I wouldn't have otherwise had. You wouldn't have with all of that without that culmination effect. So it just elevates it so much in my mind. Well, with that is the list. This took a little bit longer than I thought, but if you did watch all the way, thanks for that. And on to great games for 2021.